Series 4 of the revival arguably saw Doctor Who at its peak in terms of cultural impact and audience engagement, at least here in the UK. This statement isn't a reflection on the quality of the series, which we'll get to, but in terms of relevancy, the show was seemingly in the midst of a new golden age. Such high levels of hype and hyperbole were fitting because the word I would use to describe Series 4 is big. Every idea that the show has previously utilised is taken to its logical extreme, a maximalist approach to familiar themes and genres. Put simply, the lighter episodes are outright comedies. The scarier ones are outright horror stories. Let's start with comedy. The show had never been afraid of inserting humour into scripts, but Partners in Crime and The Unicorn and the Wasp have it placed far more prominently. Not only are both stories breathlessly witty and full of comedic moments, but these beats are emphasised more than had been the case before. Think about the running gag in Partners in Crime, where Donna and the Doctor keep narrowly missing each other. The closeness of these near misses is heightened beyond the realm of believability, but these slightly ridiculous contrivances are accepted because of their comedic value. When the two finally meet, the episode again prioritises the humour above all else. Donna's silent explanation becomes more and more indecipherable, the usually unflappable Doctor looks more confused than ever before, and the jaunty music only confirms how we're meant to interpret this scene. It's funny, first and foremost. The Unicorn and the Wasp adheres to this principle even further. It's not just that the story is one of the funniest in the show's history. I think it is, but I know that comedy is subjective. It's more the fact that the humour is baked into the fabric of the story more so than before. Rather than being a story with a few jokes, it feels like an outright comedy, a thought-out attempt to adhere to the conventions of the genre. That's not to say that the episode is plotless. It's not. In fact, it's a detective story, which brings its own set of tropes, but these tropes exist alongside those designed to heighten the comedy and are able to be adapted in service of this primary goal. The denouement at the end, which should be the dramatic climax of the mystery, is constantly punctured by jokes and funny lines. These jokes are consistent and evenly distributed throughout the story, and the performances serve to heighten the comedy rather than downplay it. At the other end of the genre spectrum, you've got Midnight, which feels like a genuine attempt at a Lovecraftian psychological horror story. It's not the first Doctor Who episode to try and be scary, but this goal feels uniquely singular thanks to an absence of pretty much every other Doctor Who staple. The sci-fi element of the story feels less intrusive because we don't know what the creature is or how it does the things it does. If you ignore the fact that Midnight is another planet, then the story could take place anywhere on Earth. There isn't anything inherently fantastical about the setting that impacts the story. It could take place on a bus or a train. The creature is technically an alien, but we only know that because we're told that Midnight is an alien planet. We don't see the creature, and we can't really conceptualize it, and so it ends up embodying a terror that is much broader and more universal than a scary alien, like a fear of the dark, the unknown, or simply something that goes bump in the night. It's also worth noting that the real threat in Midnight comes from the human passengers. Their fear and desperation results in them turning on each other, a situation more akin to a psychological horror, something that the show had never done before to this extent. Outside of these broader examples, Series 4 offers equally maximalist demonstrations of the show's more specific episode formulas. We have another historical story, but this time they actually explore the ethics of time travel and whether it's possible to interfere when faced with a historical tragedy. The only other example I can think of that goes over similar ground is Father's Day, but the interference in the earlier episode is much more personal. Rose wants to save her father, and the Doctor objects in part because he feels like Rose used him to get what she wanted. Donna wants to save anyone she can in Pompeii purely because she knows what's coming and wants to help. She eventually convinces the Doctor to save someone, but this comes after several scenes where the two characters outline their positions on the matter. In this regard, The Fires of Pompeii feels like the first episode of the revival that uses its historical setting as something more than just a backdrop. The obligatory Dr. Light episode is taken to the extreme too. Not content with removing him from an episode, Turn Left depicts an entire parallel universe in which the Doctor is absent, following his death during the events of The Runaway Bride. The Unicorn and the Wasp, meanwhile, improves on the idea of meeting a famous author by making the episode a parody of that author's work, an idea that elevates it beyond its two predecessors, conceptually if nothing else. We get a mid-series action story, but the stakes feel more applicable to a finale. The Sontaran stratagem and the Poison Sky involves a worldwide threat, a classic villain, and reintroduces Unit. Martha Jones also makes a return appearance, and the end result is a bombastic two-parter that could have been a perfectly serviceable conclusion to the series. As for the actual finale, well, it's the most ambitious thing the show had ever attempted, an achievement that perhaps still stands. On a story level, the threat is greater than anything conceived in the revival thus far. The Daleks and a revived Davros steal the Earth to help power a device capable of destroying the entire universe. But it's the presentation that makes the story truly momentous. Right from the beginning, The Stolen Earth emphasises the magnitude of the threat by introducing characters from Torchwood and the Sarah Jane Adventures alongside a smattering of other companions and secondary characters, most notably Rose. The stakes are so high that they force all of these characters to get involved. The crossover aspect of the story is probably its most celebrated detail, but I don't want to ignore how well the Daleks are portrayed. The speed and ferocity of the destruction they cause certainly helps bolster the threat they pose, as does The Dark and Endless Dalek Night, one of Murray Gold's most dramatic pieces. All in all, it's a monumental conclusion to Series 4, but the incorporation of so many characters and story threads elevates it further to a celebration of the entire Davies era. Well, you can't get much bigger than that. The idea of this era celebrating itself is also seen in how it incorporates references to the classic show, or rather, how it doesn't. In my Series 3 retrospective, I noticed a slightly increased willingness to reference the past, and while Series 4 isn't devoid of this, there's certainly no noticeable increase from the previous year. You still get the old reference here and there. The Doctor references the events of the Romans in Fires of Pompeii, or the events of the Dalek invasion of Earth in The Stolen Earth. I think what's more noticeable is the number of references to previous stories from the revival. Donna inadvertently reminds the Doctor of the Unquiet Dead in The Unicorn and the Wasp, an episode that Rose and the Doctor also reference when they discover that Gwen is related to Gwyneth, a charming but pointless explanation as to why both characters look like Eve Miles. The Doctor even borders on breaking the fourth wall when he references the empty child in The Poison Sky. Series 4 does continue the tradition of bringing back classic antagonists, but in both cases their reintroduction is juggled alongside other returning characters or story threads. The Sontaran stratagem sees the return of the Sontarans and a proper reintroduction for Unit, but these two elements from the classic show share space with the return of Martha Jones, which is given comparable screen time. Likewise, Davros' return is definitely exciting, but the sheer amount of revival-era fan service overpowers the potency of this villain reveal, especially when a key part of the story is the climactic return of Rose. Returning to the idea of a maximalist approach to storytelling, I think Series 4 also demonstrates this philosophy in the way it tackles political issues. Series 3 was not devoid of politics, but these issues were often in the background, used to flesh out a setting more than anything else. Series 4, in contrast, highlights more specific, tangible topics that are afforded greater visibility and prominence when referenced. Planet of the Ood is blatantly about slavery. Turn Left depicts the rise of an extremist government. The Sontaran stratagem utilises the issue of pollution as a major plot point. And even Partners in Crime deals with the weight loss and pharmaceutical industries. I'm not saying that all these stories provide insightful commentary on their respective topics, but these issues are at least important to the plots of each episode and are specific enough to instantly prompt comparisons to their real-world counterparts. Of these four examples, I think Turn Left is the outlier. Not only is its target less specific, with the episode being broadly critical of extremist governments and reactionary politics, but information concerning who's in charge or how they got there is non-existent. Most of the runtime is spent reinterpreting the events of previous stories, so there's not enough time to give any details concerning this country's parallel government. But I would argue that the few scenes that depict the political realities of this nightmare world are striking enough to effectively communicate an anti-fascist viewpoint. Watching Colasanto and his family be loaded into an army truck destined for an internment camp, coupled with Wilf's heartbreaking line, is so powerful that it tells you everything you need to know about the episode. Whew, I feel like I need a minute after that. Let's change gear and look at our regulars, starting with the Doctor. After coming into his own in Series 3, Tennant is just as strong a year later. He's maybe even better in Series 4, although that might be down to a more consistent set of episodes and a companion dynamic that allows him to better demonstrate his range. He's so good in both series that it doesn't really matter, but what Series 4 does demonstrate is another slight increase in his overconfidence and pride. We had his messianic resurrection in The Last of the Time Lords, and his big speech in Voyage of the Damned, and in Series 4 we get similar moments, only now they're not confined to specials or series finales. Just look at the fires of Pompeii. The 10th Doctor has saved many people over the years, but never has it been framed in such an overly dramatic way. You also get his speech in The Doctor's Daughter, which feels like a self-conscious attempt to craft a big emotional moment. These are scenes that emphasise his singular heroism and feed into this idea of his growing sense of self-importance. I like this characterisation because it's essentially a character flaw, one that makes this incarnation unique and interesting. It's eventually made worthwhile by the power of the Time Lord Victorious development in The Waters of Mars, but we do start to see the impact of Tennant's inflated self-opinion in Series 4. Part of what makes Midnight so great is the fact that Tennant's attitude gets completely turned against him, and it very nearly kills him. We also get that heart-wrenching ending in Journey's End, where despite everything the Doctor has accomplished, he's left completely alone. It reminds us of the loneliness that he's powerless against, which in turn validates his preference for travelling alone, and overall it's a great lead into the single-mindedness that defines his Doctor throughout the following specials. The most obvious character change, though, is the reintroduction of Donna, now a series regular. I made it clear how much I loved Martha in the last retrospective, and I really like Series 1 Rose too, but Donna is easily the best companion of the Davies era. It's funny, because Catherine Tate was originally a guest star for The Runaway Bride, an actress known for her comedy sketch show and a no-brainer for a cheesy Christmas special. They do tone down Donna's abrasiveness a bit by the time we get to Series 4, but she never completely loses this focus on comedy. She's reintroduced in a largely comedic episode, and her banter with the Doctor is consistently funny in every story, even if it's only a few lines. Just listen to her theme. Every companion has one, but Donna's is probably the only one I would describe as unserious. If you listen to Rose's romantic piano-led theme, and then put on Donna's song, you can instantly hear the difference. It's jaunty, heavily reliant on the brass section, and often used to soundtrack funny moments. These moments, by the way, are among the funniest in all of Doctor Who, especially in a comedy story like The Unicorn and the Wasp. I could probably recite that entire detox scene from memory, it's so good. And yet, despite all this, Donna is given so many emotional scenes, and what's more, she absolutely nails them. Seriously, I look at the multitude of series-defining moments that Donna carries, and I can't decide which is the most impactful. It's probably her pleading with the Doctor to save someone in the fires of Pompeii, but I also love her reaction to the Song of Captivity in Planet of the Ood, her losing her children in Forest of the Dead, and any number of moments in Turn Left. Unrelentingly funny or emotionally devastating, Catherine Tate can do it all. Like Rose and Martha before her, Donna also has a family life that exists alongside her fantastical adventures, and here Russell T Davies once again demonstrates his unparalleled knack for creating believable characters and relationships. What I particularly like about Wilf and Sylvia is that they embody the two opposing sides of Donna's character. If I were to describe Donna in the simplest way possible, I would say that she's brash on the outside but incredibly sweet on the inside, and I think these two traits are magnified by her two family members. Of all the companions' mothers, Sylvia is easily the least outwardly affectionate, and is certainly brash in her negative attitude towards Donna. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got Wilf, who is probably the sweetest, most endearing character in the entire show. I absolutely love Jackie Tyler, but I think Wilf might just edge her out as being my favourite family member of any companion. It's such a cold take, but Bernard Cribbins is so good in the role. It's nice to finally have a family member who completely gets the Doctor and who is instantly excited at the prospect of Donna travelling the universe. His happiness at seeing Donna in the TARDIS at the end of Partners in Crime is incredibly heartwarming. He has no shortage of funny lines, but equally consistent is his ability to make me well up. I've already mentioned his gut punch of a line in Turn Left, but there's also his final conversation with the Doctor in Journey's End. He just starts talking and yep, it's cutting onions time. It's hard to beat Wilf, but I love the addition of Sylvia as a secondary character as well. She's an often antagonistic presence in Donna's personal life, but her judgmental parenting style always feels realistic, and I absolutely believe that she's Donna's mother. A character doesn't have to be likeable to be good or worthwhile, and the back and forth between Donna and Sylvia is often quite funny, even if the humour largely stems from Sylvia's lack of sympathy. At the same time, she's not completely one note. I think the moment that really stands out to me is the one in The Poison Sky, where she snaps at Donna and then instantly apologises because the fear of what's going on makes her realise the futility of arguing with her daughter. It's not much, but for all her negativity, she does love Donna. I also love her characterisation in Turn Left. Wilf and Donna get a lot of the praise for their performances, and rightfully so, but Sylvia's slow descent into depression really feels like a third pillar of the story. It's so well performed and commendably subtle, at least until this scene in which Jacqueline King absolutely kills me with her blank stare and dead eyes. Going back to Donna briefly, a big change that they made to the companion dynamic was the removal of any romantic feelings between her and the Doctor. They have a funny interaction about it in Partners in Crime, and there are a few couple jokes in later episodes, but it's clear that these two characters are just friends. As I've said before, I don't hate the idea of a Doctor-companion romance. I actually do think it can work, but I'm glad they made this change for Series 4. Martha was largely defined by her romantic attraction to the Doctor, as was Rose in Series 2, but without this emotional crutch, Donna needed something else to sustain her character across the series. Donna's character arc in Series 4, and I use that term loosely, revolves around her lack of self-confidence and her attempts to overcome this. In every encounter, she proves her capability to herself as much as to the Doctor, and this leads to moments far more satisfying than either of the romance plots for Rose and Martha. For all her wit and bluster, in her quieter moments, Donna is shown to have quite low self-esteem. She mentions several times how she's nothing special, an opinion seemingly shared by her mother, and she often jokes about her meagre list of accomplishments. It's a mostly private affliction. In public, she doesn't let anyone other than Sylvia put her down. She blasts Colonel Mace for ignoring her in the Sontaran Stratagem, and does the same to the Shadow Architect in the Stolen Earth. But her repeated self-deprecation hints at a more complex character and suggests that these instances of heightened confidence are at least partly performative. This, of course, makes it all the more satisfying to see her become more capable, or to see her challenging the Doctor when necessary. It all culminates in the finale, where she becomes the most important woman in the universe. As character development goes, it's nothing too introspective. We're not dealing with Michael Corleone over here. But it helps define Donna beyond simply being a companion, and it adds a little something to her appearances across the series that I really enjoy. Alongside Donna's growing confidence, Series 4 has a few other repeated events and ideas that help to tie its episodes together. Like most of Davy's story arcs, they're very unobtrusive, but the fact that there are multiple story threads running through the series helps to remedy their individual slightness. We have the phenomenon of the bees disappearing, the brief reveals of Rose, the coincidences surrounding the Dr. Donna, and several planets having been lost prior to the finale. Of these various links, I think the missing planets are my favourite. It makes rewatching the series that little bit more rewarding because the events of the finale actually trigger several of the earlier episodes' plots. The Pyrovals need to conquer Earth in the fires of Pompeii because their home planet is lost, as is the adipose breeding planet, which causes the events of Partners in Crime. We also hear about the lost moon of Poosh from Dee Dee in Midnight, which doesn't impact the plot of the episode, but it does at least lead to her character being in the story, as it was her paper on the subject that drew the attention of Professor Hobbs. It's reminiscent of the interconnectivity that I really liked in Series 1, where the actions of one episode will directly trigger another one, except the effects of these actions are seen in the past rather than the future. It might just be hindsight, but I can't help viewing Series 4 as a culmination of everything great about the Davies era. The revival saw Doctor Who return as a big, vibrant, dramatic show, and Series 4 is the biggest, most vibrant, most dramatic series of them all. Its strengths are numerous and obvious. These are big stories painted in broad strokes. Not only is the series full of great standalone stories, but each one is elevated further thanks to the best Doctor-companion dynamic of the revival thus far, no mean feat given the strength of the competition. I can see this series being a favourite if you appreciate the kaleidoscopic nature of Doctor Who. It doesn't have the most involved story arc to tie everything together. Instead, it thrives on the sheer strength of its stories and the absolute commitment to every genre or style it attempts. Before we wrap up, I think it's quickly worth mentioning that Series 4 does benefit from being the fourth series of the revival. That's not to diminish its inherent strengths, it's just to acknowledge that several of its episodes rely on, or at least benefit from, the groundwork laid by previous stories or series. As much as I enjoy the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky on their own, the return of Martha is a significant boost to these episodes, and even more so in The Doctor's Daughter. Having a returning companion in these stories wouldn't have been possible in the same way during Series 3. On a bigger scale, the spectacle of so many returning companions and secondary characters helps bolster the threat of the Stolen Earth and makes the finale to the series feel as monumental as it does. Another one of the series' strongest episodes is Turn Left, which relies on the events of previous episodes over a series and a half to tell its story, and likely wouldn't have been written without this amount of continuity to play with. I think even Midnight benefits from being in Series 4. Part of what makes it scary is the fact that the Doctor's usual demeanour is used so effectively against him, and seeing this happen so late in Tennant's tenure means that we've seen him in action enough times to be familiar with his characterisation. We've seen him take control of a room again and again, and so this subversion of our expectations is all the more effective. Maybe this is what makes Series 4 so special. It's the product of a team unafraid to go bigger or push the show further than had been the case before. This series is often singled out for particular praise, and I don't think it's hard to see why. I've outlined its many strengths in this retrospective, and these strengths were clearly visible to the viewing public in 2008 as well. When reviewing previous series, I've mentioned how the show was building momentum, and Series 4 arrived at the peak of this phenomenon. Everything seemed to align at the right time. The confidence of the production team, the vision of the showrunner, and the appetite of the general audience, all culminating in this fusion of critical and commercial success. Along with the following specials, Series 4 is the triumphant end of an era, but to so many people, it's the era. Thanks for watching this retrospective video. This script is a bit longer than the previous ones, so I hope the excess length wasn't too much of a problem. I clearly had a lot to say about this series, but I'm also not quite finished yet, so join me next time for the ranking video, where I'll attempt the unenviable task of ranking maybe the most consistent set of episodes in all of Doctor Who. Wish me luck. The denouement at the end. The denouement at the end. The denouement at the... Oh, fuck.